Good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you'll take your seat, we're going to get started for the first morning of the Brand Insider Summit. I'm Steve Smith. I'm the editorial director of events here at MediaPost. It was my joy to put this event together, and I think as you'll see throughout the next 3 days, this is among the more exciting programs that we've had to offer. I think one of the more exciting to put together. The passion from a lot of the direct-to-consumer brands is palpable. In all of the discussions that I've had with many of you in this room, putting this content together, it's clear that we're at a new stage in our understanding of what brand is, how it's built, how it relates to consumers. And that's really the undercurrent of the next 3 days. And it's belied by some interesting recent stats. For instance, Civic Science, a research company, found that in the first quarter of 2014, among millennials, 84% of millennials said that they were at least somewhat loyal to their favorite brands. But just a few years later, that was down to 78%. And in fact, millennials show about 12% less loyalty to brands than their elders. But then every year we also hear from Havas Media and their meaningful brand study, which tells us again and again that 77% of American consumers really wouldn't care if most of their brands disappeared. Or 77% of brands disappeared tomorrow. They really wouldn't care. We're told brand is dead, that it's part of a larger movement that's going on, that brand meaning and loyalty are no longer there, that it's part of this other larger tectonic shift in a lack of trust and loyalty and belief in a lot of institutions, commercial among them. And we're losing respect and we're losing devotion and attachment to these things in politics, in social, and even in commercial spheres. And remember that this whole idea of branding really started over a century ago with the last great revolution. The Industrial Revolution really brought us this idea of branding, and it was necessitated by mass distribution and mass production. As we started buying and distributing products away from local sources, we needed guarantees of quality. We needed guarantees of assurance, of sameness. And safety, in fact, was also a part of it as well. And that's where branding really started in the late 1800s, the late 19th century. And then as we moved into the 20th century, mass production, mass distribution, and especially advertising, ramped that up. We started moving into a consumer culture. And that meant we started attaching meaning to objects. We started attaching meaning to all of this stuff we now were capable of buying. And branding became a part of that. It became a part of that process of attaching meaning to things and meaning to our consumption habits. And advertising, of course, was there to help exploit and leverage that and use brand as key differentiators. And that, of course, is really what the 20th century consumer capitalism was all about. That's where branding was coming from. That's what its roots were. And as we see the digital disruption emerge in recent years, we see that a lot of ways in which it's changed our relationship to brands, but also maybe not. Enter all of you, a lot of you who are in the direct-to-consumer space, who have invented and built new brands, some of you just in the last few years, are really putting the lie to this concept that brand is dead. In fact, you're making us rethink what a brand is and what it can be for the next century. The Quips, the Tomboy X's, the Curologies, the Freshlies, the Ministry of Supplies, the Tarts, the Farmer's Dogs, the Harrys, all of you are in this room, by the way. You're all proving that brand does still matter. Digital didn't disrupt that. And in fact, as long as we live in a consumer culture, we will need to attach meaning to the objects that we surround ourselves, to the things that we choose, to the ways in which we do spend money and find meanings. And a lot of this show has that undercurrent, and that's what was so exciting about talking to all of you, is the way a lot of you talk about your brands and talk about your products. It's very different from the marketers that I've spoken to over the 30 years that I've covered the rise of digital. But we may be entering a new era where we think differently about how this stuff is built and how we communicate it. Maybe we're talking less about mass production, mass distribution, and mass advertising. And now we're starting to talk about niches. We're talking about niche products. We're talking about more direct sales and even drop shipping directly to consumers, not using the traditional distribution system. We're also talking about data-driven personalization, different ways of relating to the consumer and understanding and talking to them. A lot of you started out, many many of you in your marketing started out by building brands through performance or advertising. The very thing that we were told for years doesn't build brands, but just sells stuff. But many of you were using a lot of those levers and tools and that data to do things that legacy brands were not succeeding in doing. Many of you are devoted to highly integrated uses of data. You're the envy of many of the legacy brands because of the ways in which you were able to build from the bottom up with digital. You were able to connect the data from all the different pieces of your operations, from marketing to consumer service and to retail. And you were able to start using that data in ways that others were struggling to use. So in many ways, there are a lot of legacy brands who look to you, and I can tell you they do because we've had a lot of direct-to-consumer brands at our events over the last few years with a lot of the big legacy brands, and I can tell you the old brands are really interested in the ways that you guys operate. But interestingly, many of the direct-to-consumer brands that have emerged over the last few years, you're at an interesting stage. In many ways, a lot of the old 19th and 20th century notions of branding and brand building are starting to assert themselves in your history, in your stages. How do you scale this stuff? How do you make larger growth, sustainable growth for a company? How do you start moving beyond the niches? How do you start moving beyond the direct channels of communication and distribution that you've been using? And so at this summit, one of the ideas of this summit is really to bring those two worlds together. The majority of the brands who are in this room, a lot of you are the direct-to-consumer brands that I've been talking about, some old, some new. But at the same time, we also have a number of legacy brands, a number of brands that also were among a previous generation of direct-to-consumer brands who actually are 10, 15, 20 years old, but have digital at their core. So one of the questions at this event is, what can we all learn from each other? What can the old and the new learn from one another? As they sort of seem to be moving towards each other, but in opposite directions. What can we learn about moving towards and pivoting towards brand building? Away from simply a performance advertising mindset into a brand building mindset, and how that changes the way we come at marketing. A lot of you, what can we learn from each other about depending more and more on outside sources? One of the hallmarks of a lot of the direct-to-consumer brands was that they kept a lot of this in-house. They kept a lot of the data in-house. They kept a lot of the marketing operations in-house. And because of the nature of digital advertising, a lot of it could be done through self-service. But as they start expanding, as they start looking for growth, a lot of you are starting to partner with others, with agencies, with data providers, with vendors. How does that work? What can we learn? What can the two generations of brands learn from one another about that? A lot of you are now starting to move into TV. What can we learn from each other about how TV works, but also how TV can work differently? The ways in which not only TV can, as it always has traditionally, build brands, but the ways in which a lot of you can bring some of the learnings from the digital channels that you've been honing over the last few years and bring that and inform and change the way we think about TV and even buy TV. And how do you scale consumer service? How do you take a lot of the personal relationships, and we're going to hear a lot of that over the next few days, exactly how personal some of the relationships are that a lot of your brands have with consumers. How do you start scaling that? And not only keep it personalized, but keep it personable and make it still feel human. And also, how do you maintain the meaning and the purpose of the brand? I think one of the hallmarks, one of the distinctions of a lot of the brands in this room is that you grew with a greater sense of meaning, either about craft or about devotion to a particular cause or a particular subset of people who needed to be served that weren't being served by other parts of the economy. How do you grow? How do you scale that? How do you bring that to a larger audience and move out of the niche and get that greater reach? We're going to be talking a lot about that over the next few days, but the whole heart of this summit is really you. We built these summits over the last 15 years to focus on genuine peer-to-peer sharing. That's the format that we have here. So let me start with you, and let me start with a series of questions that some of you may remember I sent a lot of you over the last few days. And what we try to do at the summit is start with your voices. Sort of take the temperature of the room. This is a large set of slides. I won't try to read through them. I'll try to hit the highlights. We will put them online so you can go back and refer to them later. But these are responses to a series of sort of table-setting questions that I asked several days ago of all of you. First, I asked all of you how you really got to scale. What at least what is the biggest challenge that all of you are facing?
as you start thinking about scaling your operation. Low brand, this was a very common lament, is spreading awareness. Although many of us in the industry know a lot of the niche direct-to-consumer brands, in many ways, as you start branching out, one of the biggest challenges, how do we make more people aware of who we are, especially if we're using data-driven advertising that tends to be talking to the same group again and again and again. Finding profitable ways to grow customers. This was actually a very common lament. A lot of you are starting to face cost pressures. You're starting to see CPMs rise, especially as you start trying to reach outside of your most focused group. So the cost of acquisition and how to move to scale and still maintain a decent profitability is one of the key challenges that we've been hearing. A number of others, there are a lot of stray different ones, but especially consolidation of distributors combined with a big uptick in emerging brands. There is a lot of competition out there. I think one of the key questions that's going to emerge over the next couple of years, as I've been talking to a lot of you, is become a greater awareness of people in your niche who are competing with you in your niche. I mean, how many mattress companies can we really take? And for a lot of you, you're starting to face that same competition. Finding the right talent. I'm actually was surprised that I didn't hear more of this in a lot of the responses, because that's what I hear when I talk to a lot of you personally, is how you scale your own staff, how you hire people, and where, I think maybe will be a topic in a lot of the roundtables today. I asked about which channels have been the most responsible for your growth. A lot of them very predictable, of course. A lot of players who have really grown up on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, especially with video. This has been the heart for a lot of direct-to-consumer brands, and it proves out here. Social lead gens, also paid social, and a lot of paid search. That was driving a lot of the initial sets of businesses, but also a number of companies that have sort of made a home for consumers on their sites and actually have brought a lot of people through their sites and used their sites as a main marketing tool, probably more so than a lot of legacy brands have. And a lot of this comes out of the content development that a number of the direct-to-consumer brands have been doing. A lot on paid search. Strategic partnerships, TV. We're going to be hearing tomorrow, and a lot of these are touching on themes that we're going to be developing in the agenda itself. Tomorrow we're going to be spending a lot of time on video and TV and the various ways in which several brands have been coming at TV differently. I asked about where you'll be seeing the next stage of growth. A number of brands who are going to be, as it says here, doubling down on what they've been doing well already, and particularly in video, but also across all of the social channels. Digital TV, again, we'll be hearing about that tomorrow, the ways in which OTT especially can be a way to take a lot of the digital principles of targeting that many of you learned online and start bringing it to video screens. OTT is one of the places where we really see the crossover of old and new TV approaches. SEO, paid search. CRM, this is another stage. Amazon I didn't hear much from. By the way, how many of you are already working with Amazon or are expecting to work with Amazon? Interesting. Less so than most of the summits that we hold. That's an interesting thought, that so few of you really want to get in bed with Amazon at this point. And also CRM, the ways in which you're cultivating your own databases to increase growth internally. Then I asked about what are the biggest challenges that you're facing in working with outside agencies and vendors and data providers. This was an interesting range of very similar answers to this. A lot of it is integration, since a lot of you have built up systems internally, databases and integrated systems. Getting them to work nicely outside of your own house seems to be a really big issue, but also the ways in which you share timelines. But there are others here that I think are even more interesting. A lot of stuff that simply has to do with the way in which agencies work and their turnover, and the ways in which they don't play well with your particular industry or your particular brand. But then this is one that came up a lot. And I think this is fascinating. As a company that has studied the rise of digital advertising and is studying agencies now, our company has studied this for over 20 years. This is really interesting. The ways in which many of you came up with a similar problem of working with agencies that don't really understand you, don't get what you're trying to get at, what your values are, how you're trying to communicate it, and come up with plans that actually work, that are consistent with your company and product values. And again, a sort of a disconnect between the cultures that you guys have generated internally and the cultures that you're seeing in a lot of agencies. That's a fascinating topic, I think. And again, later this morning, we're going to have a panel that talks just about the ways in which companies are outsourcing or keeping things in-house and how they're working with third-party partners. And of course, when it comes to vendors, again, simply making your way through the morass, but also I thought that this one was especially good one. Need to find partners that are doing something different or have a niche that goes beyond what 50 other vendors can offer. Sorry, but we will be your strategic partners, or we can track conversions right within our platform is not enough of a differentiator. Making your way through the vendors and really trying to find the ones that really map against your needs, that seems to be a perennial problem, and hearing the same line from everybody. I also asked about what's your biggest customer service challenge, since customer service has often been one of the hallmarks of the direct-to-consumer brands, that relationship with consumers, how that scales and how you manage it as you grow, I think is going to be one of the key problems. We're going to engage that on the third day in a panel discussion there, but we're also going to have people, I think, talking about it throughout. We'll hear some presentations over the next 3 days that talk about customer service at scale. The ways in which this company is using Facebook ads and using it actually as a route for customer service, ensuring that you're responding to customers in a timely way. A lot of supply chain issues. One of the problems that I think a lot of companies are facing is that you're already very often depending either on shipping companies or other parts of a supply chain that aren't as facile as you are, so your brand reputation is hanging on third-party companies. That was a particular lament. And then here, this I think is a really interesting point to end on. Our customer service allows for self-service as well as talking to a real human being. We want to empower customers with education and the tools to help themselves, because it's often faster for them and helps them understand the solution if they're a part of the process. But we don't want them to feel like we're pushing them to do it themselves, because we don't want to help them more, because we want to help them in more traditional ways like over the phone. That idea of, as the technology becomes more important to scaling, maintaining that personal relationship, being able to empower people with a set of digital tools without at the same time distancing yourself from that customer, making them feel like you're pushing them towards the machine rather than towards you, I think is an interesting challenge that a lot of you have. It also has to do with personalization, using the tools and the data to have that personal touch without it feeling like a machine is talking to them. That's especially germane, I think, for a lot of you, because a lot of your brands really have been built on a reputation of that kind of close personal service. Again, I wanted to just sort of start with just a reflection of some of the points that that people brought to this event, and I think you're going to be hearing within the roundtables. So let me, before we start with our opening keynote, let me give you a few pointers about the summit. For how many of you this is the first MediaPost summit you've been to? Okay. As expected. This is a new series, and we have a lot of companies that are new to us here. And we welcome you, and we hope that you'll find this a unique experience. We have structured this to enhance peer-to-peer exchanges. And that means that the stuff that we put on here on stage, we are the biggest publisher of marketing and media news in the US, it's all on the record. We're live streaming it over MediaPost.com, we're blogging it, we'll report on it. Everything that's on stage is on the record. We'll be archiving it so you can go back and refer to it later. But then at noon, we flip the model. Everything is off stage, and everything when we come off stage is off the record. There are reporters and editors like me who are here, but we won't quote anybody or report on anything unless we have anybody's specific permission to do so. And then we retire to the roundtables. We're going to break the room down into 4 large tables. Each table is going to take one of the topics from the morning and extend it into a conversation. And that's really how the formula works works here. We offer this sort of burst of content and ideas for 3 hours in the morning, and then use the roundtables to turn it into conversations. I can't stress enough, after doing this for 15 years, how important those roundtables are. Don't stop at noon and run out and do the cell phone call and try to do the office call, try to catch up on email. The roundtables are really the heart of this summit. They always have been. Take the time to choose a table you're really interested in and engage with one another. Because those conversations, I guarantee you, even when we go out in the afternoon and you go to the winery tour and you go out touring and we have dinner tonight, they continue. That's really how all of this works. I also want to mention that we have a hashtag for those of you who want to tweet, hashtag MPBISD2C. I think it's up here somewhere, or it'll be on the brochure once we get them in here. So, welcome to everyone. Thanks, of course, to all of our many sponsors. You'll be hearing from several of them over the next few days. They're out in the hall. We can't do this without their support, and we really appreciate that they support independent journalism, which is what we put on here. The 3 hours of content that you get here every morning is all done independently and was done in consultation with the brands themselves about what they wanted to hear about and what you wanted to talk about. So please enjoy the next few days. And we're going to start on an interesting note. We're going to start with a company that I would say represents one of the best cases of a great evolution from old media to new, and that's Ancestry. Ancestry really started as a magazine, and interestingly enough, if you think about it, even though magazines really have gotten pummeled in the digital age, magazines really were the original direct-to-consumer channel. They had your home address. Unlike most other brands, they could talk to you and they could bring advertisers into the home in ways that others couldn't. Product launches that you'll all find familiar.